If you would go ahead and turn to Daniel chapter 7. We're going to be spending the majority of our time there, verses 1 through 14. This is a very interesting passage. It's a vision of Daniel, and it foretells a lot to come. This is, of course, still in the captivity period. Daniel's in Babylon at the time, and this vision takes place under the third king Belshazzar, really at the end of the reign of Babylon here. But here we start in Daniel chapter 7. Daniel sees this vision. Starting at verse 1. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and a vision of his head while on his bed. Then he wrote down the dream, telling the main facts. Daniel spoke, saying, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea, and four great beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. The first was like a lion, and had eagle's wings. I watched till its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. And suddenly another beast, a second like a bear, it was raised up on one side and had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and they said thus to it, Arise and devour much flesh. After this I looked, and there was another like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. And after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked up out by the roots, and there in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words. We'll stop there for now. And if you don't know what's going on right now, you wouldn't know. It's pretty vague at this point. This is a pretty strange vision. It sounds like a passage in Revelations, a similar kind of literature here. And but just defining a couple things here. So what are we looking at? Who are we talking to? This vision was given to Daniel. It was a dream. It was a vision from God revealing future events. And when, as I already said, it was during the Babylonian captivity in the reign of Belshazzar in 539 BC. And then why? And what is the why of this vision? It's to give Daniel information of what's going to happen in the future in regard to a specific group of kingdoms, and also the establishment of God's eternal kingdom when it would come to play. And now we'll look at just a couple things about the book of Daniel. If you look through Daniel 1 through 6, it's really easy to read. It's very interesting. There's a lot of stories our kids even know. Daniel and the lion's den, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, in the fiery furnace, the great statue that Nebuchadnezzar built, and they wouldn't bow down, and they were cast in the furnace and they were saved. Our kids understand Daniel 1 through 6, but when you start 7 through 12, it becomes a very different book. It's a book about prophecies, things to come, 4 main visions that Daniel sees, and thankfully through the end of that book, you're not left without some help. There is interpretation of the visions through the book that they're still difficult, but without that help, it would be very, very hard to understand. But we're going to try to do that this evening in the first 14 verses of Daniel 7. So, as I already said, there are four main visions, and most of it really center around this same theme here. And it's not the intent of this lesson to give a very detailed history of these world empires that we're going to be looking at this evening, though you could, and a lot of time could be spent proving the historical accuracy and foreknowledge of these prophecies to a very fine detail. But we're not going to be doing that this evening. I would encourage you, though, if you are interested in it, to study it further, find the history, and you'll see how it aligns with the Word of God, and it will increase your faith and understanding in God's prophetic Word. And Daniel is actually a book that proves that to another point. Daniel is a book that has been criticized greatly by by secular folks and atheists alike for being basically, they claim it was written much after the time of Daniel. Because of how detailed these prophecies are, it's like there's no way someone could have wrote that before it happened, and they basically try to discredit it for that purpose. And of course, we know that that's not the case. And as you read through this, I would pose this to you: why would anyone write a book? These last couple chapters, you read them, and you ask yourself, why would anybody write a book 500 years after the fact, trying to betray it as if you were writing it in a prophetic sense? Why wouldn't you just write it as a book of history? What are you gaining in acting like it was prophesied 500 years before? There's no benefit to that. If you read through this, you'll clearly understand, wow, hearing it from a historical perspective would make much more sense. So that argument doesn't hold a candle to my intellect, which is pretty small. But that's how it makes sense to me. It doesn't make any sense to try to fake this as some false prophecy. It just doesn't. And ultimately, we realize that that's not the case, but that's, people have hardened their hearts to the Word of God. They'll come up with any kind of excuse to appease their own sake. So now we're going to go through the four beasts now. We read the description of them, we got sidetracked, and now we're going to come back to the interpretation of these four beasts. And we're not going to go in very deep detail, but these four beasts symbolize four kingdoms that are going to arise in succession on the earth. And we can see that clearly as interpreted by someone here in Daniel chapter 7, verses 15 through 18. This is kind of concluding after we're going to stop there, but it picks up at verse 15. It says, I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit within my body after he had heard this vision. And the vision of my head troubled me. I came near to one of those who stood by and asked him the truth of all this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. Verse 17, those great beasts, which are four kings which arise out of the earth. So that clearly tells us what the image of those beasts are. They're four beasts, they're four kingdoms that are going to rise out of the earth. In verse 18, we'll get back to it later, but let's go ahead and read it. But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. And then throughout the remainder of the chapter, it's actually going into more specific details about the fourth beast. And but 17 and 18 are really the verses to be emphasized on what is the meaning of this vision. So the first beast we saw, it was a lion. Back to verse 4. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I watched till its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. And that kingdom is Babylon. It's talking about King Nebuchadnezzar there. We brushed on it shortly in the overview of Daniel, how King Nebuchadnezzar was humbled, and it really fits that description there. And anyway, just to take my word for that, at the moment that beast is referred to the kingdom of Babylon. And Babylon was in existence there from 626 to 539 BC. And that's 539 BC is the ending of it, and that is actually when he was receiving this vision. And it's another interesting, from a historical perspective, based on the archaeological discoveries they have found of Babylon. It was a city decorated with lions. The lion was like their state animal kind of thing. If they had a state animal, it was going to be a lion. So that also just coincides also with that description too. Not that that's not the significant facts proving it, but that is interesting. So now the second animal was a bear, and suddenly another beast, a second like a bear, it was raised up on one side and had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And they said thus to it, arise and devour much flesh. This kingdom was the Medo-Persian Empire. A couple quick notes about it. It existed from 539 at the end. They overtook Babylon and continued on from 539 to 330 BC. And a couple notes here. There's some description about the beast which also identifies it. And just for reference, the bear and the leopard are further described with the literal kingdoms in chapter 8. They also identify these kingdoms specifically as this is Medo-Persian Empire. This is Greece. So there's no question to that. This is not speculation. But anyway, Media, I guess is what they were called. Yeah, I can't get that right. So Media was its own entity, okay? And it took over Persia. And they kind of formed an alliance to some degree. But ultimately, the Persians overcame Media, and they were actually they upended the Medes. They were still like an alliance there, but the Persians were the first-class citizens, and the Medians became the low side. So you go back to that description, and you see a bear, and it says it was raised up on one side. That's what that's alluding to there. And then also, another interesting aspect to consider, it says it had 3 ribs in its mouth, and why would you even say that? It's just it's a bear. But those 3 ribs, I believe most likely represent the 3 primary overcome kingdoms that it conquered, being Egypt, Lydia, and Babylon. So more evidence to that. So now the third beast. This one is called a leopard. Verse 6 says, After this I looked, and there was another, like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. This was Greece, and we can see that, like I said, in chapter 8. Other details specifically about the leopard, it had wings on its back. We all know about Alexander the Great, and this is the kingdom that we're talking about here. They talk about the swiftness of Alexander the Great conquering the known world at that time. I believe that's what it's referring to. And then also the more interesting point here is that the beast had 4 heads. And what we see after Alexander the Great died, basically on his deathbed, they're like, so who are you going to give the kingdom to? And his answer was, to the strong. And he died. He didn't name anybody. But 4 generals overtook the kingdom, and it was separated into basically 4 groups there. So you have that 4-headed leopard, and that's the description of it there. I'm telling you, all this stuff is really, really interesting. I would encourage you all to read through Daniel and study it a lot too. Don't just read it, it'll go past you. But continue to study it deeper. And that kingdom lasted from 330 BC to 63 BC, and it was ended. And then the 4th beast was the one that didn't have an animal description necessarily. There's not a known animal that we would just say that is what that is. It was just called a great beast. It had iron teeth, it had 10 horns, it had a lot of things that would be hard to put in your head and make up an animal into. But nonetheless, there it's described in verse 7. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. And this kingdom was Rome. So as we look into this more closely, we can look back at chapter 2 and actually see there's a whole lot of parallels of what we've just discussed. Daniel 2 deals with the interpretation of King Nebuchadnezzar's dream of the great image. William covered that just a week or 2 ago. We realized Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and he saw a great image, a man standing there, and his body was subdivided into different materials. First, his head was of gold, and that was representing Babylon and King Nebuchadnezzar. It said that there. The second kingdom was the chest of silver, and we know that to be the Medo-Persian Empire that we're talking about. The third kingdom was the belly and thighs of bronze, and that was Greece. And then the 4th kingdom, mixed of iron and clay, that was Rome. And what we see, I'll show this picture at this time. This kind of breaks down and parallels these 2 chapters and also chapter 8 in a manner where we have just the image that I was just discussing in Daniel chapter 2. Then we have Daniel chapter 7 on the first column there. So, vision of Daniel chapter 2, head of gold, chest of arms and silver, belly and thighs of bronze, legs of iron. And then we look down through there, we see the lion is paired with the head of gold, and it's represented as Babylon in both of those instances. The bear is representative of the chest of arms and silver, and that is also the Medo-Persian Empire. The belly and thighs of bronze, that was the leopard. That's the goat in chapter 8, and that is Greece. That's Alexander the Great's kingdom. And then the legs of iron, talked about in chapter 2, are parallel to the terrified and frightening beast in chapter 7, as we know is Rome. Well, that was a very helpful chart. Like I told Etienne, I like graphs, I like charts. That's a good one. I didn't make it, I found it from Nate Bivens. But very helpful in putting that all in front of you where you can see it pretty well. I find where I'm at again. But anyway, what we see is the same prophecy, but given to two different people and from two different viewpoints. It's telling the same thing it's foretelling of the same event, but it's given to Nebuchadnezzar in the first vision, it's given to Daniel in the second vision, and Daniel really receives more detail, and that's what we're going to continue to dive into now. We're not going to go any further into the studies of these kingdoms or anything, though you could spend a lot of time just going through the history of all this, and it would probably be well worth it. But there's more that we're going to cover now. So let's pick up back in Daniel 7, starting at verse 9. Daniel 7 and 9 says, I watched till the thrones were put in place, and the Ancient of Days was seated. His garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was a fiery flame, its wheels a burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. 1,000 thousands ministered to him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were open. And this vision is still ongoing. We see one described here as the Ancient of Days. A couple traits that we can pull from this. His garments were white as snow, this symbolizing purity and righteousness. His hair was like pure wool, that underscoring his eternal being. His throne was a fiery flame. A stream of fire came from before him. And it says an innumerable, 1,000 times 1,000 ministered to him, 10,000 times 10,000 served him. Just an innumerable host. It's not a literal number there, but just an uncountable amount of people served before him. And the scene depicts that of a courtroom. A judgment is coming to place. The court is being seated, and everybody is adjuring here. And then continuing on in verses 11 and 12. So I watched then because of the sound of the pompous words which the horn was speaking. I watched till the beast was slain and its body destroyed and given to the burning flame. As for the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. And these verses summarize really just the judgment of these four kingdoms here. Emphasis was given to the fourth kingdom, talking about, so that kingdom was Rome, but you saw it first as the beast, and the 10 horns concentrated in on it, and there was one specific horn within that was very blasphemous. And we see in this depiction God judging that kingdom much more fiercely and taking it out pretty abruptly in its final punishment. And another highly significant message that we can pull from this is a couple things here. The Ancient of Days, of course, is God Almighty, and He's in control. God gives each of these kingdoms their dominion and power. He sets them up. He takes them down. It's nothing of themselves. He pronounces His judgment and brings judgment to each of these kingdoms. And like I've already said, God is over the nations of this world. And this doesn't mean that each nation and leader does what God's will is. He may set them up. They may not be faithful to Him, but that doesn't mean God will use them in the accomplishment of His will, for good or for bad. It really doesn't matter. God's will be accomplished with or without us. So a question here, is this judgment referring to the end of time? I don't believe it is. I believe it's just a current judgment on these nations, because nothing seems to show that this is a final judgment. But throughout the Old Testament, and evidence of that, if you look through the Old Testament, you see God's judgment on wicked nations live. It's not held to the end at the resurrection. He proclaims judgment on nations throughout the Old Testament. He's an active God dealing with the world. And I think that's just what we see here. And we even see that, on Israel, his own nation. He pronounces judgment to them. That's why they're here in Babylon. They were judged and they were put there for that reason, for their infidelity. So now let's continue on to the next character we're going to come in contact with, and we'll spend the rest of the time on these verses. So verses 1 through 12, we see the story of the kingdoms, the earthly kingdoms, who are described as beast-like kingdoms, which are basically going to rule the entire world at that time. That was the world. They'd come to power, they conquered, and they reigned for a time, and then they're taken down. All four of them have their start and their end. But what we're going to see in this next kingdom, it's going to have a starting point, but it's not going to have an ending point. So Daniel chapter 7, verses 13 and 14. It says, I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. Then to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom the one which shall not be destroyed. So verses 13 and 14, they are a continuation of this vision, but I do think it's important to note this, and this is a quote, I'm just going to read it. The events depicted here do not chronologically follow the destruction of the little horn in verse 11. The first 12 verses represent what will take place down here. Verses 13 and 14 will show what will take place up there, emphasizing there in heaven in the kingdom. And this is James Smith, his book, What the Bible Teaches About the Promised Messiah. And I thought that made good sense. So first question here, who is the Son of Man? A couple of things we're going to look at. Who is the Son of Man? What did he receive? What are the defining features of his kingdom? And when did he receive the kingdom? And is this also, Daniel 7, 13 and 14, is it referring to the end of time, second resurrection, or what is it referring to? And we're going to hopefully answer all those questions through the remainder of the study. So who is the Son of Man? We see it here. He is coming to the Ancient of Days. It can be concluded that this was a specific person. Verse 14 specifically indicates that this one received a kingdom. It wasn't a group or any other thing. It was a specific individual. And though he receives a kingdom, he is a king, right? He received a kingdom. But he is not like those four beast kingdoms. He has a different description about him. He is like a son of man. Like the Son of Man. He's not shown as this wild beast with exotic heads and everything else. He's different. So we'll continue on there. What did he receive? It says he received dominion. Dominion, if you look in Strong's there in that verse, it just defines it as an empire. He received glory and he received a kingdom. So those are the things, and they're really all similarities of each other, receiving the kingdom there. And then what are the defining features of the kingdom that we can see? It says it will encompass all nations, all peoples, and all languages. The empire shall not pass away. It's not going to implode. Other nations implode. We'll probably implode one day. Hopefully not, but, be realistic. Every nation will fall in on itself if it's allowed to stand without being conquered. One of the two is going to happen. It's going to be overtaken, or if it's going to fall from within. Not this one. It cannot be destroyed, and no force is going to overtake it. So just similarly, you're either going to implode or somebody's going to overtake you eventually, and that's not going to happen here. And contrasted to the other four world kingdoms, this is the greatest in size, glory, time span, and stability. All these things, there's nothing else compared to it. And now let's look forward real quick. Matthew 16 and verse 13. I'd just like to read that real quick. Talking about the Son of Man here. When Jesus came into the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, Who do men say that I the Son of Man am. I think that tells us who the Son of Man is. It's Jesus. And that is actually Jesus' most common self-title of him, most common self-description. When he refers to himself in third person, as he often did in, foretelling things to his disciples, he would say the Son of Man. He uses that terminology about 80 times in the New Testament. He doesn't call himself anything else more than that. He calls himself the Son of Man nearly every time he is referring to himself. So when did he receive the kingdom? And we see that, we'll look at it both ways. During the reign of the Fourth World Kingdom, Rome. We can see that in Daniel 2, and we can also see that in Daniel 7. But we'll read Daniel 2, 43 and 44. It says, as you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay, talking about the lower half there of the feet and the legs of iron and clay. Verse 43 of Daniel 2. As you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay, they will mingle with seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. And in the days of these kings, specifically, and in the days of these kings, talking about this empire, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. And then let's go back to, if you would, go ahead and flip to Matthew 16. I'm going to read a few more verses there. We're going to look at their response to Jesus' question that we just looked at in 13. Who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? We're going to look at their response. Matthew 16 and 14 says, so they said, some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, and others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. He said to them, but who do you say that I am? Simon Peter answered and said, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Jesus answered and said to him, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I also say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. William went through this exact thing too. I'm not going to try to do everything that he covered here. But we see at this point, if Jesus is the king and he's receiving a kingdom, it's not happened yet in Matthew 16, but it is going to happen. We skip on down to verse 28. It gives us more indication of when it will. Matthew 16 and verse 28 says, assuredly I say to you that there are some standing here who shall not taste death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. So it's coming soon. In Acts chapter 2, the day of Pentecost, like I said, William covered this well. I'm not going to read any more there, but we see the kingdom was inaugurated on earth on that day. So the next question there is, and some mistake this to be, but is Daniel 7, 13 and 14, is it referring to the final resurrection judgment here, or what is it referring to? And I think we've kind of already covered it leading up to this, but I do want to clearly answer that question. And it's easy to be mistaken with the description of the final judgment, because when you look there, you see the Son of Man coming on the clouds, and what do you see? What do you expect in the final judgment? The Son of Man coming in the clouds? Absolutely. So some folks, I think, and maybe for other reasons, also do take this as to be referring to the final judgment. But I don't believe that to be the case. Daniel, when we look back in Daniel 13 and 14, we can look at specifically the direction that Jesus was coming, the Son of Man was coming. Verse 13, I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. Then, also another context clue, then to him was given this kingdom. So he was approaching God and got this kingdom. And what does that remind you of? The ascension. He came to God after his resurrection. Let's look at Acts. I'll read this one too. I said I wasn't going to copy everything William did, but just to be thorough, let's go to Acts chapter 1 and read that also. You look at these two together, and I think it really parallels well. So we just read about Jesus coming to the Ancient of Days and receiving the kingdom. Now let's read Acts chapter 1, verses 9 through 11. Justin, do you care to read that?
Sure. 9 through 11? Yes.
9
Now when he had spoken these things while they watched, he was taken up, and a cloud received him out of their sight. And while they looked steadfastly toward heaven as he went up, behold, 2 men stood by them in white apparel, who also said, Men of Galilee, why do you stand gazing up into heaven? This same Jesus, who was taken up from you into heaven, will so come in like manner as you saw him go into heaven.
So we see that they're coming on the clouds, going on the clouds. He is truly going to come back on the clouds just like you saw him go. But in this case, I do believe he is coming to God from just previously being resurrected and then to receive the kingdom. And when you look at it like this, is Acts 1 there, that account, that's the ascension as seen from earth. If you look at Daniel 7, that's the ascension as seen from heaven. And that's pretty cool to see those things in the two different lights, because that's ultimately what we see happening there. So now that's basically what I have prepared for us, but I would like to kind of book in these two chapters in this study with a couple verses here from each. Daniel chapter 2, verses 44 through 45. This is a summary of that vision, and then we're going to read basically the summary of the vision in Daniel chapter 7 and make some concluding remarks, and we'll be done. But Daniel chapter 2, starting in verse 44, says, And in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all the kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Inasmuch as you saw that the stone cut out of the mountain without hands, that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will come to pass after this. And then the dream is certain, and its interpretation is sure. You can take it to the bank. And then Daniel chapter 7, verses 15 through 18. Daniel 7, starting at verse 15, says, I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit within my body, and the vision of my head troubled me. Just after finishing verse 14, what we just saw. I came near to one of those who stood by and asked him the truth of all this. So he told me and made known to me their interpretation of these things. The emphasis on verse 17 and 18. Those great beasts which are four kings which arise out of the earth. We really focus on 18. But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. So the summary of what we can take from Daniel chapter 7 as well as Daniel chapter 2 is this couple points here I'm just going to go through. Kingdoms of the earth will rise up with great power. God will pass judgment on these, taking their power and giving it to the next. He's going to raise them up. He's going to set them down. That's what he's always done and what he always will do. But after these four specific kingdoms, there will be a new world kingdom like none before that God was going to establish. This kingdom will be eternal. It's going to encompass all nations, all peoples, all languages. It's not going to be destroyed. It's going to last forever. The kingdom is going to be given to the one like the Son of Man, being Jesus. The Son of Man, Jesus' most self-referenced title, and he is the only one who referenced himself in that way. 80 times, with the exception of Stephen in Acts chapter 8, I believe. Other than that, he is the only one who said Son of Man, talking about himself. While he was living, he was the only one. He used this, and why did he use it? To indicate this exact prophecy given in Daniel chapter 7, because all the Jews knew this. Why do you think they were looking for a kingdom? Daniel chapter 7. I'm not saying that's the only one, but that's a very significant kingdom prophecy. So here's a big context clue. When Jesus is here saying, Son of Man, I'm the Son of Man. Here it went. But nonetheless, that's why he called himself the Son of Man. And then the consolation and thing that we have to look forward to after this kingdom's been established, it said the saints will possess the kingdom, will share in the glory of it under the Son of Man, the King Jesus. It's basically what I have. This prophecy is very significant in giving precise timing, upcoming events and signs to indicate the coming of the Son of Man's kingdom. As we've started from Genesis and we've worked our way very slowly through here, you can really see now the tightening of the details. As you look in Genesis, it's pretty vague, Genesis 3, but as you get to where we are now, just 600 years before, things start to get much more clearly, or not that it's clear to understand, but much more finely detailed prophecies. And I think that's very interesting. Like I said, it's 600 years before its fulfillment. It specs out these 4 kingdoms to a T. Even individuals specific to those kingdoms, you'll see in history, fulfilled what exactly it said through the rest of the book of Daniel. Daniel 7 is not the only one. There's more to come. But to me, if the book of Daniel can open your eyes to God's prophetic power with study and with understanding of the Word, and I don't think another book will. It's very interesting, very powerful. Like I said, it's not that it's easy to understand, but once you begin to see what's going on, I think it should really help you appreciate and understand the power and foreknowledge that God has. And that's what I have for us this evening. If you're not a member of that kingdom, you don't share in the reign, you don't share in the glory of it, and you don't have anything to look forward to. If you would desire to join this kingdom that we are a part of, the church is the kingdom of God, it's part of it. We give you that opportunity through baptism for the remission of your sins. Or if you've done something, if you have already done that, you already are a member and you've sinned in a public nature and simply need to make things right, or you just want to request the prayers of the church, we give you any of those opportunities while we stand and sing.
Thanks for watching this video. I know what you're thinking. I don't want to miss another video from this channel. In order to avoid that, click on the red button down there, subscribe, and then click the bell icon. Not only will that alert you each time a new video is uploaded to the channel, it will also help spread the channel to other people's awareness. So, go ahead, do it. Like right now, click on it.